Good morning and welcome to Focus on the News. We've got an interesting program this morning. Welcome to John Tigas. Good to have you with us. And today we have Diane Sare. Diane is a most impressive individual who ran for U.S. Senate against Chuck Schumer in New York. And she ran as an independent candidate. And she had some very interesting things happen to the election tallies in her race, which only goes to show that there is no voter fraud in America. We have a totally reliable system. So anyway, welcome to you, Diane. And I think you may have an announcement for us later on when we get to that. But we're going to kick off with the announcement of Donald Trump for his re-election bid for president in 2024. So, John, what was your reaction?
Well, I think we've been kind of expecting this, haven't we? No big surprise, except that he maybe waited this long. The interesting thing that's been going on clearly is a lot of folks are now trying to turn this into a dispute between DeSantis and Trump, which is really interesting because even in DeSantis's remarks, I believe it was yesterday, as he talked to this, he didn't name Trump by name and really didn't. He actually turned around and attacked the media for trying to stir things up. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, clearly, the other individual who's announced he's running is Mike Pence. I don't think anyone gives him a snowball's chance in hell to win the nomination. But what do you think in this business between DeSantis? Do you believe DeSantis is actually seriously considering a run against Trump? And if so, what do you think would happen?
Well, Diane, what are your thoughts?
I don't know, actually. I have no idea what DeSantis is thinking about, so I don't know if I can speculate. I will say that I'm actually pleased that Trump has decided to run. I am not endorsing anyone yet, but I do think, and having gone through what I did as an independent candidate, I think it's outrageous that you have the news media, the FBI, and everyone else trying to determine who the candidates are. And to be fair, they did the same thing in New York to Cuomo, whose policies I think are horrendous. But Letitia James, the state attorney general, in as much admitted the whole purpose of the thing was to make sure he never ran for office again. That should be a real warning sign to Americans. So I applaud Trump for having the guts to do this in defiance of what he's gone through over the last years.
Yeah, I think any objective viewer would look at it and say that was a very good presentation, and the media was quite misleading because they suggested that during his announcement that he was attacking DeSantis, which was false. That was disinformation, I believe, is what they like to call it. It was deliberately false and misleading. Trump never spoke about any of the other potential candidates during his remarks. They were very measured. They were very, very well put together. Now, the media did not want to talk about the things that Trump laid out as part of his campaign platform. But it was very good. All they talked about was, there's a conflict between the two. And there was nothing in this announcement that suggested a conflict with anyone other than Joe Biden. But here's some things that Trump did announce. He said that if elected, he's going to push for nationwide voter ID, something that almost every rational human being sees as, how can you do an honest election if you don't know who's coming in to vote, whether it's somebody paid by one of these clowns or not.
And it's not who's just coming in. It's the people who mail in their vote. How in the world are we determining whether or not those folks are valid or not? Talk about an opportunity to steal.
And this is created with the intent of stealing the vote. These election procedure changes have occurred just recently, just over the last few years, all promoted by Democrats in every case. But Trump was saying, I want nationwide voter ID, same day voting, and paper ballots. Now, when I first ran, well, the first couple of elections back, this has been 20 years ago, there was a woman who's a very strong supporter of mine, and she was dying of cancer. I mean, she was literally on her deathbed in the very final days of her life. She had her husband take her to the polls, and by then she was so emaciated, so thin. He carried her into the polling place. She cast her vote, went home, and died. Now, the vote is very important. It's not a casual thing. We're talking about the future of our nation, the life and death on the planet, whether we'll have nuclear war and so many other things. And so the idea that somehow it's got to be made convenient, it's kind of like a welfare system. You know, everybody gets a ballot, everybody has a little fun. No, this is serious business. There should be same day in-person voting. I think it surprised everybody when Trump said that nationwide voter ID, same day voting, and paper ballots. The reason that we went to the computerized system was that it's so much easier to alter the vote by computer than it is when you have paper ballots. It's not that people haven't cheated with paper ballots, but it's a lot harder to do it on a large scale. So this was one thing. Let me run through a couple other.
Well, but before you go on, I think it's actually a really good point, and it goes on to what we'll talk to with Diane later. It really doesn't matter who runs. It doesn't matter whether DeSantis runs, Pence runs, anyone else runs. Until the election system is trusted, it really doesn't matter who's going to get run for president, because look what happened with the midterms. Clearly, there's mischief going on in so many different places, particularly blue states. And if we have, I mean, we had 81 million people vote for Biden in 2020. We've got people, voting for Kerry Lake that don't exist. We've got certainly in New York and here in Virginia, we got ballots disappearing in the tens of thousands when they're conservative candidates. So we don't have a confidence as a country, and we're going to have this exact same thing happen again. The old, what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing, expect something different to happen. Yeah. Until we get back to a system where it's one day, it's one ballot, and it's one vote, and people can trust in it, we're not going to have confidence in our government. So it really does. In the next 2 years, instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on candidates, let's spend hundreds of millions of dollars on fixing our election system.
Yeah, of course, our problem and the dilemma that we've got is that until we get people in position to make the changes, then we can't make the changes. And
well, we can't make it legislatively, but have we really pursued all of the judicial means to go after these things? I have not seen in just a few cases lawsuits that have gone after. I mean, the constitutionality issue is by itself. Clearly the Constitution says one day, not multiple days or multiple months or weeks or whatever else. I just don't think we've exhausted that, and we're
it's election season now. We have
exactly. Season. We have got to, if we want to see true Republican leadership, let's first off admit that there is a big problem in the matrix, and that has to be addressed, and stop ignoring it because we're afraid that we're going to be called election deniers. And then two, let's put that money that wasn't spent on campaigns, let's put it towards fixing this, because without it, there is no longer a country.
Well, it's a serious situation. And well, I'll get into this a little bit later. But anyway, we've got a long history of voter fraud. It's not something that started with Donald Trump. It's not something that started, with this election. Has gone on forever. But a couple of the other things I want to mention that Trump did announce, something that was very pleasing to a lot of us was he intends to restore to active duty the GIs that were forced out because they refused to take the COVID shot. He says with full back pay, and that got him a great round of applause. Everybody agrees with that. It was just an abomination what they did. They refused to recognize anybody's right to religious freedom, and in fact, they've had, DOD's had problems because they discovered that, at least with the Coast Guard, that the responses to petitions for religious exemptions were computer generated. There was no human intervention. It was just no. Your answer is no. Now, what is your question? Okay, how it's such a blatant violation of due process of law. So in any event, he wants to make that correct. He said that he wants to stop the transgender indoctrination, the grooming of children that's taking place within our schools and so forth, trying to make them more amenable to sexual assaults by adult pedophiles. He says no more men in women's sports. Hello, only in America would you say, okay, well, why can't a man compete in women's sports? If he calls himself a woman, isn't that good enough? Well, anyway, so also he spoke against critical race theory, which is this Marxist indoctrination that's designed to create class warfare with blacks and so forth, going out and rising up against other people. Just terrible for people of every race, blacks, whites, Hispanic. Critical race theory is a recipe for disintegration of the nation. So he says he's against that. He came out for sealing our open borders, end the catch and release, complete the wall, bring back the stay in Mexico policy. I think most everyone could agree with that. Biden has managed to not only erase the border, but also to subsidize the export of human beings from foreign countries into America. Because they're paying, you think of it, a ticket for the drug cartels to move somebody into this country may cost them, $9,000 or $10,000. Now, where do ordinary campesitos, whatever they call them, people out in the remote areas of El Salvador and Honduras, where do they say, Maria, take that $10,000 out from under the pillow and let's give it to the drug cartels? Yeah, really? You think all those people have $10,000? How many Americans in our inner cities have $10,000 they can whip out of their pillows so that they could go somewhere? So it's bought and paid for by billionaires associated with the Democratic Party. So he's going to do that with the border. He talked about reversing the Biden energy policies, which have been a nationwide disaster. And he also touched generally on getting along with foreign leaders, not being quite so bellicose. Now, it's a little equivocal, but he talked about Lopez Obrador down in Mexico, how he convinced him to put 27,000 Mexican troops on the border, which was very effective. He also talked about his interaction with the leader of North Korea, and I think, I'm not sure that he is perfect in that area, but he seems to be better than a lot of the alternatives. So one thing that Carrie Lake was she really became kind of a hero, or at least for the Republicans. It looked like she had won the race, and then they slow rolled the election process, and I don't know how you sort out anything from that Arizona voting. Maricopa County is famous. It's infamous for voter fraud. People across the world know the name Maricopa County, and the only reason is because of voter fraud.
Yeah.
And I don't know if either one of you have any thoughts about that particular race.
I'm going to go back to what I said before. They did the same thing in 2020, and we let them do it again. They just did a repeat show. So until we stop that, we shouldn't act surprised.
Well, people
exactly
were
what
proud.
they did.
I mean, the whole point of calling January 6th an insurrection worse than the 9/11 or Pearl Harbor attacks was to terrorize people. And then, of course, Giuliani was disbarred in New York, remember? So I know there are election groups, and we'll get to this, in New York, who have done really fantastic work. And the fraud in the voter rolls, the fake ballot ID numbers, is very blatant. It's like what we ran into in a certain petitioning fraud committed by actually someone in the Republican Party trying to sneak on the ballot as an independent. It's not subtle. It's very documentable, but they said they could not find candidates who were willing to fight, which I am willing to do. But then when I agreed that we would try and file an injunction before the election, because you have to do everything before the election, there's really nothing you can do after the election, we couldn't find a lawyer.
Right. Well,
right. And that's this terror campaign. So you have this gigantic elephant sitting in the middle of the room, but no one is willing to address it unless they have extraordinary courage. And I think that perhaps Trump's announcement in 2024 will impel some people to decide that maybe they better get in gear to address this before the 2024 elections.
Well, Diane, let's shift away from the Trump election, and let's talk a little bit about your election. You challenged Chuck Schumer, Honest Chuck up in New York, and my father was very close friends with Chuck Schumer's uncle, who really looked and sounded like Chuck Schumer, although he was not a sinister fellow. He was a fairly nice guy, but anyway, tell us a little bit about what happened in your race where you ran as an independent candidate.
Okay, well, of course, first of all, the whole thing is really designed, and I realized that when I happened to go to the Board of Elections to check on various things, which we'll discuss, it's rigged from top to bottom in every different dimension that you possibly can imagine. So first of all, the Democratic Party and Republicans who were in on it, and I talked to a fellow so-called conservative who said, oh yeah, we worked like this with the Working Families Party to keep everybody off the ballot, right? So they tripled the signature requirement from 15,000 to 45,000, which result was that I was the only person in a statewide race who managed to qualify by filing 66,000 signatures. The Libertarian Party failed, the Green Party failed. No one could get on. It's very onerous. I just happen to be very determined and have determined supporters, so we did it. Then they said that I could not participate in a debate, even though 66,000 people had signed to say that I should be on the ballot, because they said that if you want to participate in the debate, you have to have 15% in our polls. Now, first of all, that's ridiculous because the whole point of the debate is supposed to be so people can get to know the candidates. They should do the poll after the debate, not before the debate. But at any rate, so I was suspicious because two of my petitioners told me, we got a call from a pollster, and when we told them we were voting for Diane Sare, they told us that was not a choice.
Right.
So then we got the questions from the 4 polling agencies and discovered, in fact, no one was given a choice to vote for me. And when I complained to Spectrum News about this, they said, oh, yes, they did. They could have chosen other. And my response is, my mother did not name me other. So it really was crazy. Then we had what happened election night. And I will say, finally, later, there was one poll that did mention my name. And in that poll, I was polling 5.1%, which is frankly remarkable for an independent campaign. Just doesn't happen, and indicates the kind of breakout and reach and, you know, what we did with the petitioning and what happened on social media and otherwise. So, Jose, if you can show, I went to bed at a little after midnight on November 8th, thinking that I had 55,000 votes. Do you have those slides? Yeah, so this is the first one taken. You can see it's in French up there by a friend of mine in France. I didn't think to do screenshots when it was over 55,000 because it never occurred to me that my vote would start going down. But you see here, I have 53,000 votes. He started doing screenshots because he noticed that while the other votes went up, mine was going down. And go ahead next, Jose. So then a little bit later, and look at the total number of votes, which is 5,541,000. I have 51,554 votes. Next. Then when the vote is 5,600,000, my vote has gone down to 29,500 votes. Next. Then when we have 5,644,000 counted, I've gone down to 27,900 votes. Next. And then finally, I get down with 5,600,000 votes counted, 25,829. Okay, so this is on television. This is the New York Times reporting of this. It was on Fox News. It was everywhere. So you can take that down. But I want to make a point because I did something at the end which demonstrated how totally willful this is, which is I said to my husband, I see the state board of elections said that I had 25,600 or something like that throughout. So it seemed that somehow the media was getting their feed from the counties and then adding it up. And somehow the counties that were then being readjusted to lower it, because I discovered in the county where I live, Rockland County, I had 6,212 votes, 5.8%. on the night of November 8th, but on the morning of September 9th, I had 277 votes and 0.2%. So what I developed a hypothesis which proves how deliberate this is. When I was at 27,000 votes on Friday, I said to my husband, please go through all 62 counties and write down my vote because I'm going to lose 2,000 more votes because they're going to bring it down to what they're saying at the state board of elections. And I want to see which counties do that. So he writes it all down. He was kicking himself for not getting screenshots, taking the figures from the county boards of elections. Sure enough, a couple hours later, my vote drops by 2,000 more. And he's able to identify the 3 counties that dropped their votes. So it's just astounding. And like you say, the legal system, we're looking into filing various things under the HAVA Act, Help America Vote Act. They're all designed to help the fraud. You can file a case if you were denied access to a poll, if they weren't handicapped accessible, if someone tore up your ballot or something like that. But they explicitly say, 1, you're not allowed to ask for any remuneration for damages. And 2, no matter what you show you're not allowed to change the outcome of any election. So it's really incredible. And then the possibility of getting a manual recount. How do you, because in New York, the ballots are paper, but they're scanned through machines, but the originals exist, presumably. But it seems to be virtually impossible to get them. So I was actually kind of happy about them doing it this way because it's not secret. And I was trying to think, are they just that incompetent that they would do something so blatant and stupid that they reveal how they're stealing the vote right in front of you? Or, and I think this might be more likely, it's a message to me and my supporters, which is, you will never get anywhere. You can't do anything about this. And we're just going to do this in your face, sort of like Leo Strauss and The Big Lie, right? The idea that the way a dictator instills fear is they lie blatantly to the population and make the people feel powerless to respond.
Yeah, what's interesting about this, voter fraud is so massive and so complex that it's very hard for ordinary people to grasp the magnitude and all the moving parts of it. I think what makes your situation very graphic is that you're a very honest person. I know you personally, and you're also a very balanced, very analytical individual. So you and your husband have, you've documented this very thoroughly. I don't think there's too much. It's not as though there's some ambiguity. Basically, your votes evaporated as the night went on. And how does that happen? Well, through the magic of computing. Rubbish in, rubbish out, and they put in the numbers they want. They delete things. They change votes. Not only with your election, but with elections all over the country. Now, it was interesting.
And there's no audit trail because there's no audit possible.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was interesting that there was an article that was published on the internet. I think InfoWars did something. There are a couple of others. Mainstream media never touches anything dealing with the honesty of elections. But Twitter attached a notice, and it was misleading warning, cautioning people that what they were seeing in the screenshots you had taken was false. They should not believe their lying eyes. They should believe lying Twitter instead. And it concludes by saying that U.S. elections are safe and reliable. Authorities have told us this is the case, according to many fact checkers. And and this is a quote: "Voter fraud is rare in U.S. elections, according to Reuters, Associated Press, and election experts from the Democratic Party." And they didn't say that.
Then they have a link where you can input your credit card to buy the Brooklyn Bridge.
That's right. And then they go on. They say, moreover, other forms of absentee balloting, such as mail-in voting and ballot drop boxes, include built-in checks to ensure security and reliability. This is what the fact checkers report.
Yeah, but who's getting the check that they built in?
Give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, how blatantly fraudulent and false can they possibly get? The U.S. has a storied history of voter fraud. You go back to Huey Long back in the 20s and the early 30s. You go to John F. Kennedy, who won his U.S. Senate seat by Magic Box 13. It was very famous back in the day. Now, this was back in the late 40s, but he was running. He was defeated for the Democrat nomination for U.S. Senate. And they went into one of these long, drawn-out things. And the next thing, Magic Box 13 shows up, and voila, here's some more votes. Oh, we just discovered these. And there was some big, powerful political boss, and Magic Box 13 held 202 ballots, I believe. Two were for Lyndon Johnson's opponent, and 200 were for him. Well, that's, that's only normal, only natural. But the media likes to create this image that we've always had honest elections. I think everybody, well, reasonable historians, I would say, not everybody, but reasonable historians all agree at this point that the election between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, where Kennedy won the presidency, was decided by vote fraud out of Chicago, Illinois, where you had a big political boss, Mayor Daley, who was crooked. He was the head of the drugs, the narcotics, the bootlegging back in the day. It was the most corrupt system in the United States, and it got to be a very desperate, very close election. The mafia had worked throughout the country to shift votes in different places, but the one remaining place, Illinois was folding, and if they didn't get a certain number of votes, and I think there was a phone call between Mayor Daley and Joe Kennedy, the father, and he said, look, we got to come up with some votes. Can you get me this many votes? Daley said, it's done. And the people, with their tremendous enthusiasm for John Kennedy, they literally rose from the dead. They were resurrected from the dead. People all across Chicago came out of their graves, cast their votes for John Kennedy, and the election was decided.
Well, I wanted, actually, this brings up, I think, a really, really important point, because I think that Kennedy was a great president. But that does not justify fraud. There is a principle of liberty. There is also a principle of natural law, where it is simply not true that the ends justify the means. And always that will come back to haunt you. That is, suppose the whole election had been transparent and legitimate, and Kennedy had not won, but certain of his policies, his commitment to end the Vietnam War or the space program or various things, and the population then realized, well, you know what, we didn't do a very good job of mobilizing our peers around the direction that the nation has to take. And therefore, people would have to change their behavior and their action to get the policies they need. And it's very, very dangerous when someone takes it upon themselves to say, I know better than you do what's good for you, and therefore you are not going to have a choice in this. And something like the vote. There's a reason why we elect representatives, that we have a representative government, we have a republic, right? Because hopefully you will find real statesmen and leaders that you would entrust to have good judgment to represent you. And you might sometimes disagree with them, but you vote for them saying, well, I know this person has studied, foreign affairs. I know they're a genius in physics or whatever it is. And therefore, I may not know the answer, but I'm going to trust them to make these decisions. But you elect to give that person that power. And for someone to seize that power arbitrarily and say, I'm not going to tell you how I'm making these decisions for you that are going to affect your life and your livelihood, is really an extremely dangerous view. And I'm afraid we've come to the point, you remember when Trump first got elected, that people were saying that violence was justified because he was a fascist. Well, no, violence and political discourse is never justified, because in a democratic republic, what you have to do is access the reason of your fellow citizens, because you cannot, a dictatorship will never last if you can't recruit people to reason on a higher level. Then ultimately whatever you do will fail. So I think this is extremely important when we talk about liberty, when we talk about all men are created equal and the consent of the governed. These are universal principles which are not taught and people don't think about.
It's a really good point. And, you know, interestingly enough, a lot of folks, historians would say that John F. Kennedy's deal with the devil to get those votes ultimately cost his life, because they didn't go quid pro quo and do what the mob wanted them to do after he got elected. And a lot of people believe that they called in a hit as a result of that. So everything we do in life catches up with us. I really believe that this is going to catch up with whoever it is behind all of the cheating that's going on. The good news is there are some things that can be done regardless of legal or judicial action. Certainly, you pointed at voter rolls and dead people. That's one thing that can certainly be cleaned up before elections and should be. And then additionally, the other thing that can be done is we as citizens can speak up. We can stop sitting on our hands, acting like we're going to be, you know, tarred and feathered because we note things like, I wonder why Kerry Lake was up by 10 points in the polls. Other Republicans got 10-point wins. And then after enough weeks and voter machines breaking and votes coming in, she suddenly loses by a hair. I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out something is fundamentally wrong there. Or the Laxalt, suddenly the cameras go out like Epstein in the middle of the night, and he goes from leading to losing. I mean, it just happened time again. How do we end up with a Neanderthal in Pennsylvania getting elected? You know, people recognize there's a problem. And it's no longer one box of 200 votes. It's hundreds of thousands of votes across the entire country, primarily in blue states, controlled by blue individuals. And Americans have to voice their concerns, because you're not going to be able to voice it with a vote. So you're going to have to speak up and put the political pressure on officials to make the changes.
I just wanted to quickly bring up one thing, because I think it would be worth reviving it going into the next elections, which you may remember early in 2020, the two NSA whistleblowers, Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, sent a letter to every single Secretary of State saying, they're experts, right? They designed Thin Thread. They said, we can ensure transparent elections. We can clean up your voter rolls. We are offering our services for any state that wishes to take advantage of that. Not one did, not one. And I think that is scandalous, but I think we should put the offer on the table again.
Great point. And you make a great point too, is that Republican-led states are just as complacent in some of this. I mean, certainly Georgia had problems. Arizona had problems. You know, there's no excuse for this continuing. Thank God in Wisconsin, they finally ruled their Supreme Court ruled it was fraud, but a little too late. So we've got to get after this. If new Republican leadership doesn't make this their absolute top priority, we don't have a country.
Okay, well, we're running over time a little bit here. I'm going to wrap it up, but before we do, Diane, I want to give you the final word, because you may have something to announce here, and I'm sorry we put it off for so long, but we'll let you close out the show, and go ahead.
Well, thank you. I issued an announcement this morning that I am beginning my campaign for 2024 for U.S. Senate in New York against Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's up. And I said the title of my release is "A Voice of Reason is Needed from the United States." I hereby announce my candidacy in the 2024 New York U.S. Senate race and express, and we didn't get time to discuss it, but the danger of nuclear war.
Yeah.
Both financial Armageddon and nuclear war, the two major issues affecting everyone across the board, which no one is addressing. Certainly not people in office, and not from the standpoint that's required. So that is why I am refusing to be cowed and demoralized by these outrageous actions, and announcing my candidacy in 2024.
Well, good for you. Hey.
Well,
Was. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all for listening today. This has been Focus on the News, and we were delighted to have Diane Sare, who is now the candidate in that race. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you next Monday.